So, you know us Minecrafters don't have it easy, right? It seems like in every turn, we are met with disappointment. Either it's from Mojang making lackluster gameplay updates, creators being outed as absolutely horrible people, and the player base basically being split into two with Bedrock and Java. Our community simply can't catch a break, with the only exception seemingly being the modding community. Hence why I'm doing a whole series and deep diving into the loaders we use day in and day out. But again, here we face an issue: incompatibility. Forge mods, for example, are incompatible with every other major loader. And this is the same across the board, with the notable exception of Quilt running Fabric mods natively. Although, even that reportedly isn't as smooth as it seems either. But one mod kept cropping up promising a solution to this carnage. A mod that has been repeatedly brought up in my comment section, so you can stop talking about it now when I talk about the issue in general. And its name is Sinytra Connector. Created by Survived and Maddie Robert, one of the maintainers of the newly formed Neoforged. Its goal is to make the modding ecosystem talk to each other again, by allowing native Fabric mods to run on Forge and, in the future, Neoforged. So I tracked down Survived into his house and forced him to do an interview about the project, and getting some answers as to why this mod exists, and with the full interview being linked below if you want to read that. But for now, let us dive into the project known to us as Sinytra Connector. First, I thought we'd clean some things up. These compatibility issues are mostly a necessary evil. In the beginning, with Fabric and Forge, Forge's use of mixins was limited, relying on events in order for the loader to function. This different way of doing things lays at the basis of interconnectivity issues we face today. So, Quilt, right? It's largely based on Fabric's work to start off with, as you know. But Neoforged is a fork of Forge. So why aren't Forge mods working on Forge? Well, that's because they're trying an entire new way of loading things. When the two original mod loaders actually came out, they were more compatible than you might think. Talking to early developers on the Fabric project, it was mentioned to me that they tried running Fabric mods on Forge just as a little joke and found it surprisingly easy to do. Now, this doesn't mean it's actually easy. It's like the same as asking you to find the x in the algebra equation you see right now, and that's easy for a mathematician, but for us plebs, I wouldn't even try to comprehend it. Luckily, we have calculators to do that hard work for us, and in the case of compatibility, our calculator today is called Sinytra Connector, or just Connector for short, which I'm gonna keep saying because Sinytra sounds like a tropical disease. While talking to Survived, that's how you pronounce his name, I think, about the early Fabric Steam discovery about how relatively easy it was to run mods cross-loader, I asked them what their actual inspiration was for this incredible undertaking. And in a nutshell, Survived actually tried this project before. Quote, Connector was created pretty much to explore the possibilities and limits of cross-platform compatibility, as well as to show people that the gap between loaders wasn't as large as they might have thought. And early in the year, they started exploring running Fabric mods on Forge as more of an experiment to see if it was actually possible. And to their surprise, it actually worked. They went on to explain that both Forge and Fabric actually are just two systems talking to each other. The actual loader and the API mods are actually coded for, with the loader doing what it says on the tin: load your game. And an API, or basically a set of tools developers could use to hook into the loader systems. Both of these loaders, Forge and Fabric, actually use mixins a lot more, as Modern Forge actually uses mixins quite a lot, which we will come back to in a second. But Lunar, I hear you already scream from your Doritos-infested keyboard. Why does Connector only allow Fabric mods to run on Forge and not the other way around? And to that I say, clean your room, please. It's like a mess in here. I can see your figurine right down there. Nobody needs to see that. Just take it away. And two, because of the way Forge's API is baked into the actual loader itself, in stark contrast to how Fabric's API is separately maintained, making it relatively easy for you to port your mod from Fabric to your platform of choice. But with Forge, it's kinda tricky, as it's just intertwined with the loader itself and doesn't always clearly identify between what's actually running internal code and what's the public code that everybody can access, making it tough to know for sure which part of that code can be safely edited and which parts are actually things that mod developers use generally. Now, I'm simplifying a lot here, but essentially just is, due to the way Fabric is structured, it is just simpler to do it Fabric to Forge rather than the other way around. Now this already sounds very complicated, right? At least to me it does. Well, according to Survived, it actually is mixins that causes most of the issues, as mixins are apparently tailored for very specific points in the code. If it fails to apply those changes, it will cause your Minecraft launcher to turn into Roblox and drain your mom's credit card. Why did I write that? It just crashes basically, yeah, right? It's the same amount of disappointment, but yeah, a little bit other. This begs the question, how does Connector actually function? Connector itself is just a fabric mod with a little bit of a tweak in it. It's a complement of different systems all talking to each other. First, you have the Fafi, which I'm 90% sure is an insult in some obscure language like German, or in its full name, Forgified Fabric Application Programming Interface. And now that I've sufficiently ruined my chances of ever getting a date, this is what this piece of magic code does. Well, it's essentially just a fully fledged Fabric API that mod developers use to code on Fabric baked into the Forge API, setting the foundation for this complement of mods. Next up is Adapter, something Survived is particularly proud of, and rightfully so, as it's capable of automatically handling conflicts between Forge mods and the Forge Fabric API. So basically handling those issues without a crash, or even analyzing certain issues that are brought up in the GitHub page later to help development speed along. And then of course, the main focus, the pièce de la résistance, the connector itself, the main project handling the translation between Fabric and the Forge loader. With the help of these two projects mentioned earlier, this triumvirate of programs does not only allow cross-platform compatibility, it also ensures it's stable and it's as easy as it gets for the end user. That's you, little Timmy, you're the end user. Only requiring FFAPI to be installed alongside the connector itself, this is just a way simpler way of getting mods to work cross-platform. Talking about its creation, Survived mentioned that he started work on Connector first before all the rest of the programs, as this was his so-called experiment to see if it was actually technically possible. To quote him, "I was only experimenting with adapting Fabric mods to run on Forge in terms of mappings and metadata. Since the mods I was using to test my code relied on the Fabric API, I needed to find a way to run it on Forge as well." End quote. Originally just running a small piece of code to run the Fabric API on top of Forge, this was far from a good solution, as you probably can imagine. But after discovering some of Fabric's code was actually made obsolete on Forge, they wrote a crude but promising little system that would entirely disable some of Fabric's modules in order to at least test things out somewhat easier. But due to this inherent instability that comes from just snapping critical systems out of existence, they eventually just said, screw it, and started porting Fabric's API over to a Forge implementation. Which, if that seems insane to you, that is because it is. But it speaks to both Survived and Maddie's coding abilities that they were able to pull this off. But with all big projects, there are also some things that are not as easy as it seems. Maybe it's a good point now to say that Connector isn't the first to try to do this, or the latest one. Some notable examples are things like Patchwork MC, which was a way of running Fabric mods on early Quilt, which now kinda seems redundant, but go off I guess. Feature Creep was also one of these projects that was mildly successful. It was a translation layer that actually ran above the loader itself, allowing developers to create mods independent of loader, but also of version. Though this project seems to be somewhat restrictive in what it can do and is, at the moment at least, underdeveloped. And maybe last but not least, Felt MC, which is fairly new and is a very ambitious project that aims to run Forge, Quilt, and even Paper plugins natively on Fabric with a 100% guarantee of compatibility. But as of writing this script, it doesn't seem to have a public release, and on top of that, the GitHub, as far as we could see, is very devoid of activity. Kinda like a crypto stall in like a gaming convention. All those projects that either were abandoned or are just not out yet shows how much of an achievement it is that the Connector team was able to pull this off in a relative straightforward manner. Not to say Connector is perfect, mind you, as they themselves will admit openly that it still has compatibility issues running mods. To quote the man himself, Quote, "The hard truth is we will never be able to run all Fabric mods in existence. The compatibility largely depends on how invasive a mod's mixins implementation are to Minecraft. A lot of popular mods, such as Sodium and Iris, completely overhaul parts of the game's codebase, creating many conflicts in not only Forge's API, but a lot of Forge mods as well." End quote. Though, thanks to their automated adapter system, it does seem like most mods should work. On top of that, the connector team follows a set procedure for any reports of incompatibility, and yet again, thanks to the same adapter program, this process is not only fast for the developers, but is also made significantly easier, clearing a lot of workload for the lads to actually work on connector itself. And let me be clear here, as someone who has his own large project running, keeping a grounded yet ambitious goal is paramount to get anywhere with your project. Though in this video, I might have already mentioned Maddie, right? You remember that? The guy from Neoforged? And I also mentioned Neoforged a few times. And this is not for no reason, as Connector clearly aims to switch its focus to the new Neoforged loader within the next few updates, if and when Neo releases its 1.20.4 update. And this entirely comes down to the fact that Survived himself was an occasional contributor to Forge and saw for himself the large issues it was having, welcoming the big split, as I'm going to call it from now on, as a breath of fresh air, as so many others did. Quote, "Neo brings a fresh breath of air into a loader that's stagnant for years and failed to listen to what all of its users had in mind. This is why I decided to stick with Neoforge in 1.20.4 and forward." Now, all Neo needs to do is release 1.20.4 in a stable way, and we're set. Any day now, guys, come on. So some of you might have already know I don't really agree with Neoforge's leadership decisions and the way they handled the split and all that. I made a whole video about it. Don't watch it. But as far as the project itself goes, it has a lot of potential, which I stated numerous times. And it has some truly talented people working on it. So if Fabric mods could run on Neoforge, and Neoforge keeps its promise of being a better Forge, it could make a lot of people, including myself, very happy. So, Connector. Is it worth an install? Definitely. At the current rate things are going for the main 4 mod loaders, it seems like they're drifting further and further apart. With Neoforge's big split from Forge and Fabric's recent withdrawal from the ambitious network code it wanted to introduce, maybe Connector was a much needed wake-up call to the wider modding space that cooperation is always better than war. And like a mighty warrior once said, "Ape alone weak, ape together strong." Sun Tzu. I was Lunar, you were awesome, and I'll probably see you in the next one if I don't crash and burn on my way to America. See ya!